Welcome back to CIA Declassified. Today, we are wading into the 1960s, a decade where the agency's mandate shifted from observing history to actively, violently pruning it. In the suffocating humidity of Southeast Asia, the traditional rules of the Cold War were discarded in favor of a new lethal pragmatism. This was the era of the unconventional solution, where the Office of Special Operations was tasked with creating a system that could identify, track, and permanently remove human obstacles without the political mess of a conventional battlefield. We are examining the cold mechanics of targeted removal, a project that turned the triple canopied jungle into a giant silent guillotine. Imagine you are a local district official. You go to sleep in a secured compound, and by morning, you have simply vanished. No struggle, no spent casings, just an empty bed. This was the terrifying efficiency of the agency's Kinetic-Neutralization initiative. This was the project known as JGARROW. How did this project get its name? The cryptonym JGARROW follows the agency's JG diagraph system. In the CIA's internal filing structure, the JG prefix was specifically assigned to operations and projects occurring within the geographic region of Indochina, primarily focusing on Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. The suffix arrow was chosen to reflect the directed lethality of the project, a weapon that is silent, strikes from a distance, and is reclaimed or hidden once the job is finished. It signaled a move away from messy, large-scale skirmishes toward pinpoint lethal precision. JGARROW was the agency's laboratory for unconventional removal. The project was categorized as a paramilitary action program overseen by the CIA's Special Operations Division during the height of the Vietnam conflict. A quote from a declassified 1965 field operative's debrief: "The goal was not to win hearts and minds, it was to remove the minds that were organizing the hearts against us." End quote. JGARROW utilized counter-terror teams composed of local mercenaries and indigenous tribespeople, trained by agency contractors to strike targets in denied areas where U.S. troops were officially forbidden. The project pioneered the use of silent kill hardware, including high-tension crossbows and early model suppressed firearms to avoid alerting nearby village guards. A quote from William Colby, Director of Central Intelligence: "We had to find a way to meet the enemy on their own ground using their own tactics, but with a level of technical sophistication they couldn't match." End quote. Records indicate that JGARROW maintained a blacklist of political influencers and logistical officers who were targeted for neutralization, a term that the agency defined as either capture, defection, or death. The project utilized extraction zones, pre-planned jungle clearings where helicopters would perform high-speed, low-pounce pickups of teams after a successful strike. Logs confirm the testing of delayed action poisons administered via food or drink to targets, allowing the operatives to be miles away before the effect took hold. JGARROW worked in tandem with Operation Phoenix, providing the hard-hit capability for the broader intelligence gathering apparatus. Internal memos describe the stay-behind protocol where operatives would hide in spider holes for days after a neutralization to wait for the heat to die down. Logs confirm the development of specialized jungle camouflage that utilized fiber optics and local foliage to break up the human silhouette in low-light environments. Documentation reveals that JGARROW assets were paid in non-traceable currency, primarily gold bullion or local commodities, to prevent any financial link back to the agency. The project utilized psychological terror cards, specific symbols left on the bodies of neutralized targets to demoralize the remaining enemy cell. Reports describe high-altitude, low-opening, or halo jumps conducted by JGARROW teams to bypass border radar and enter Laos undetected. The program developed portable sensor nets, early acoustic sensors shaped like plants, to detect the movement of targets along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Records show that JGARROW operatives were given deniability training, which included learning to operate entirely with Soviet bloc weaponry so that any evidence found would point to internal communist infighting. Agency researchers tested thermal masking blankets to allow strike teams to sleep in the jungle without being detected by enemy infrared sensors. The operation successfully neutralized over 500 high-value targets during its most active 3-year window in the late 1960s. Internal CIA memos confirm that JGARROW protocols included collateral damage assessment to ensure the removal of a target wouldn't accidentally trigger a larger regional uprising. The project utilized deep cover safe houses located in civilian villages, often disguised as medical clinics or agricultural supply depots. Documentation proves that the agency utilized Air America, their proprietary front airline, to ferry JGARROW teams across borders under the guise of cargo transport. Logs mention the use of drugged darts used for the abduction of high-ranking officers for interrogation at Point Alpha black sites. The program influenced the training of the first generation of Navy SEALs and Delta Force in the art of jungle neutralization. Records indicate that JGARROW was one of the first projects to utilize satellite mapping to coordinate real-time tactical movements on the ground. Technical logs describe the invisible ink map, which only showed target locations when heated, preventing the compromise of missions if a team was captured. The agency maintained a disguise kit specifically tailored for Indo-Chinese ethnicities to allow Western handlers to move through markets unnoticed. A quote from a declassified 1969 progress report: "The JGARROW asset is our most efficient tool. It removes the friction of war by removing the source of the friction." End quote. Documentation shows that JGARROW operatives were required to undergo sensory deprivation training to build resistance to enemy interrogation. The project developed miniature explosive devices disguised as common household items like flashlights or radios for booby trap neutralizations. Logs confirm the use of sniffer dogs trained specifically to detect the specific type of tobacco or soap used by North Vietnamese officers. The program proved that targeted removal was 80% more cost-effective than traditional carpet bombing for disrupting enemy logistics. Internal reports describe the silent sweep, a tactic where an entire enemy command tent was neutralized in under 60 seconds without a single shot being fired. The agency established a secret training facility in Saipan specifically for JGARROW commandos to simulate jungle environments. Official records show the use of night vision optics, which were in their primitive infancy but provided a decisive advantage for JGARROW night raids. A quote from a declassified 1967 operational cable: "A successful JGARROW action is one where the enemy believes his own men have committed the act." End quote. The project utilized signal triangulation to find the radio transmitters of high-level commanders before sending in a kinetic team. Agency logs confirm that JGARROW teams were occasionally supported by cloud seeding operations to create heavy rain and mask the sound of their approach. The project utilized psychological profiles developed by agency doctors to predict the exact moment a target would be most vulnerable. Documentation indicates that JGARROW strike teams were given escape and evasion kits containing concentrated calories and blood clotting agents. The agency tracked the success of the program by counting the number of funeral notices appearing in local communist-held village squares. The project recruited former Japanese Imperial Army soldiers who had stayed in the jungle after World War II to act as trackers. Records confirm the use of acoustic deception using speakers to play animal sounds that mask the mechanical noises of an approaching strike team. A quote from an internal security review: "The arrow does not need to be seen to be felt. The same is true for the agency in Indochina." End quote. The program experimented with injected radioisotopes to track kidnapped targets across borders using Geiger counters. Logs describe the tunnel flush, where JGARROW teams use specialized gas mixtures to force targets out of underground complexes. The agency utilized clandestine courier birds to send target coordinates when radio silence was mandatory. Documentation shows that JGARROW assets were immunized against local diseases that the enemy was known to be suffering from to give them a biological edge. Internal memos prove that the agency maintained replica villages in Thailand to practice specific JGARROW hits before the actual mission. The project utilized underwater breathing apparatus to allow strike teams to approach riverside targets without creating surface ripples. Reports indicate that JGARROW teams were the first to use starlight scopes in actual combat conditions. A quote from a declassified 1971 field memo: "We are not fighting a war, we are performing a series of surgical procedures on the body of the revolution." End quote. The program utilized micro drones, primitive wire-controlled cameras, to peek over jungle ridges. Records show that JGARROW operatives were trained in silent communication using a complex system of hand signals and bird calls. The project used propaganda shells, mortars filled with leaflets, to announce a JGARROW hit to the surrounding villages immediately after the act. Agency researchers developed odor-neutralizing sprays to prevent tracking dogs from following JGARROW teams back to their extraction points. When we look at the declassified JGARROW manifest, the most profound redactions occur in a document titled Post-Conflict Asset Disposal and Domestic Repatriation. This document holds the record for the most extensive use of the B1 and B3 exemption stamps in the entire JG series. Why is the agency hiding the end game for these strike teams? In the hushed circles of intelligence watchdogs, there is a persistent rumor that JGARROW protocols didn't end with the fall of Saigon. Speculation suggests the redacted sections of a certain portion titled Domestic Infiltration of these units, specifically that JGARROW teams were integrated into federal witness protection programs, not to hide them, but to use them as off-the-books enforcers for domestic political stabilization during the 1970s. The rumor persists that several high-profile unsolved deaths of anti-war activists during that era bear the hallmarks of JGARROW's silent clearance script. There is a long-standing conspiracy theory regarding the Operation Phoenix overlap found in the Omega redactions. Gossip among retired handlers suggests that the blacked-out pages describe the creation of deep-cover sleeper cells made up of former JGARROW indigenous mercenaries who were brought to the U.S. and settled in rural areas. The theory posits that these assets were maintained as a private agency army ready to perform kinetic neutralizations on domestic soil if the government ever faced widespread internal revolt. Perhaps the most painful rumor involves the asset disposal language. Some theorists believe the redactions hide a much darker reality, that the agency neutralized its own JGARROW teams to ensure total deniability. The speculation is that many operatives listed as MIA were actually eliminated by the agency at secret extraction points to prevent any leaks regarding the illegal cross-border strikes in Laos and Cambodia. They argue that the files are redacted essentially as a ledger of sanctioned friendly fire. Was JGARROW a success? Tactically, it was a surgical success. It allowed the agency to decapitate enemy leadership with a fraction of the resources required for a standard military campaign. Strategically, it was a game changer. It proved that precision violence could achieve political goals that blunt force could not. The project was a success because it standardized the Black Ops framework that the CIA uses today. It successfully created a culture of extreme deniability, where the most important acts of war are those that officially never happened. It demonstrated that the most effective way to win a shadow war is to ensure the enemy never knows they are in one. The program successfully birthed the modern targeted killing doctrine, moving the world away from front lines and toward kill list. It was a success that fundamentally altered the way the agency views human assets, treating them as disposable tools for a specific kinetic end. Furthermore, it proved that a small, highly trained group could create more psychological disruption than an entire infantry division. It was a triumph of psychological warfare that paved the way for the drone age. Ultimately, JGARROW was a success because it gave the agency a veto power over the survival of its enemies that remains active to this day. As far as technological and operational breakthroughs go, the silent clearance led to many breakthroughs, such as precision extraction protocols. The extraction zone techniques for JGARROW are the direct ancestors of high-speed exfiltration used by special forces in hostile territories. Silent lethality systems. The suppressed weapon technology developed for the project led to current advanced suppressor materials that make modern firearms virtually inaudible at 10 meters. Indigenous force multiplying. The use of local tribes for JGARROW is the basis for proxy warfare strategies, where small teams of advisors manage entire regional insurgencies. And digital target acquisition. The satellite mapping of the 1960s has evolved into AI-driven targeting, where drones can identify and neutralize a target based on their gait or thermal signature. JGARROW reminds us that the most effective weapon is the one you never see coming. In 2026, when a high-profile figure steps down or a dissident disappears without a trace, remember the silent clearance. The agency understood that power isn't just about the ability to shout, it's about the ability to whisper someone out of existence. You are living in a world where the front line is everywhere and nowhere at once. The jungle has been replaced by the concrete maze of the city, but the arrows are still in flight, guided by the same protocols written in the humidity of Indochina. The silence isn't an absence of noise, it is the presence of an absolute calculated control. Your safety is often just the result of not being on the list. Yet, we are all just players in a script where the final act is written in the shadows by someone we will never meet. The arrow is always in the air. The only question is whose name is carved into the tip today. Your reality is a carefully manicured lawn, and the JGARROW protocols are the hidden shears that keep the weeds from growing. Thanks for listening. Sleep with one eye open, and remember, the shadows are more crowded than you think. Join us next time as we examine KU DICE. In the marble corridors of global diplomacy, the agency found that a well-placed bribe was more effective than 1,000 spies. We'll uncover the systematic use of financial incentives and strategic bribery to buy the allegiance of foreign government officials. This project, designated as a financial co-option initiative, proved that in the game of nations, everyone has a sell price. Join us next time for the Golden Handshake. In the meantime, I'll see you in the archives.